Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and today, Mi'eretz Hashem, we will be learning Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzara Ubashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayama Bein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem, V'yaitziim Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira Mishibid L'Geula, Hashta Ba'agola V'zman Kariv and Emaramain. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for David ben Blima, who should have a Refuah Shalema B'Saich Shar Chole Yisrael. I am recording this share on Erev Tisha B'Av before Chatzos. There are those rumors out there that the Iranians have planned an attack Chas V'Chalila on Eretz Yisrael for Tisha B'Av. My reaction to that is we already had one Persian in history who decided to look at the Jewish calendar and pick a date that he decided was bad for the Yidden, and we all know how that turned out. It turned out very well for us and very bad for him. Mi'eretz Hashem, the Rebbeinu Shalom should keep that going. It should be, like we say in davening, L'chal hakamim. V'chal hakamim v'achoshvam alay l'ra mehera hafer atzasam v'kalkel machshavtam. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring the same end onto them. Okay, so now we turn to Chav Zayin Amud Beis. We are going to learn Siman Reish Nun Vav. Says the Mechaber, Sheish Tekiyos Shahayu Toikin Be'erev Shabbos. There were 6 shofar blasts that they used to blow on Erev Shabbos to let people know that Shabbos was coming. Ubay Sif Echad, and here we have one Sif. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Kishahayu Yisrael b'Yeshuvan. When Klal Yisrael was living in Eretz Yisrael, and we had our own Malchus, and we had a Beis HaMikdash, and Baruch Hashem, it should be that way. B'meher v'yameinu hayu toikin be'erev Shabbos sheish tekiyos. They used to blow on Erev Shabbos 6 blasts on the shofar kedei lahavdil es ha'am min hamalacha, in order to make an announcement and announce to people that it is time to stop doing malacha. This is based on a brisa, the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Actually, it's a piece of Gemara that you could read and translate very simply, but it is not a simple brisa to understand at all. When you learn the brisa and you look at Rashi, this brisa becomes very confusing. The brisa says, Tana Rabbanon, Sheish Tekiyos Toikin Erev Shabbos. They would blow 6 tekiyos, translating literally, they would blow 6 tekiyos on Erev Shabbos. Rishona, the first one was Lahavtil es ha'am mimalacha shebesados. The first blast on the shofar was to make an announcement and let the people that are working in the fields, so that's far away. It's far away from the city. It's out of the city limits. It's away from the homes. So the first tekiah was to let them know that it's time to stop doing malacha, and it's time to go home and get ready for Shabbos. Like Rashi says over here, Lahavdil mimalacha shebesados v'yehei lehen shois likanis le'ir. They should have time to get back home and prepare for Shabbos. Shnia, the second shofar blast, was for Lahavdil ir v'chanuyos, to stop the malacha that was going on in the city. Besides the people working out in the fields, you had people doing work in the city as well. They're closer to home, so that second shofar blast could be a little bit later. And this also served as a point in time, as an announcement that it's time to close down the shops. Shlishis, the third shofar blast, Lahadlik es haner, was the announcement that it's time for Hadlakas Neris. Then the Brisa says a little bit later on, then v'toikeya u'moiriya v'toikeya, then they would blow a tekiah and a trua and another tekiah v'shovis, and that's when Shabbos really started. So pshat in this brisa, after a lot of work, according to the Rishonim, according to most Rishonim, pshat in this brisa seems to be that the first shofar blast was a tekiah. That's the announcement, time to quit working in the fields and head on home. The second shofar blast was a trua. That one was the announcement that it's time to stop working in the city and it's time to close the shops. The third shofar blast was another tekiah. That served as the reminder, the announcement that it's time for Hadlakas Neris. Then they would blow a tekiah, a trua, and a tekiah to announce that it is now Shabbos, for a total of 6 kolos on the shofar. So that's the Brisa says, and this is what the Mechaber is referring to when he says Kishahayu Yisrael biyeshuvan hayu taikin be'erev Shabbos sheish tekiyos kedei lahavdil es ha'am min hamalacha. Haggah, says the Ramah, v'nagu b'kihilos hakatoshos, the minig in the choshev kehilos is shekol shehu samach l'Shabbos kachatzi shah, as long as it's before Shabbos, close to Shabbos, approximately a half an hour before Shabbos, Oisha, or even an hour before Shabbos, shemachriz shliach tzibur, that a shliach of the tzibur would get up and make an announcement, lahachin atzman l'Shabbos, that it is time to go prepare yourself for Shabbos. So that it would have a town crier. The town crier would go out a half hour or an hour before Shabbos and make an announcement. Rabbi say it's time to get ready for Shabbos. Now remember, back in the day, they didn't have a clock on their microwave, a clock on their stove, a clock on their refrigerator, a clock on their phone, an Apple Watch on their hands, a clock on the computer, a clock on everything. We're surrounded by clocks. The problem that we have is that every clock is a different time, and we don't know. Is it Shkia? Is it before Shkia? Is it not before Shkia? This one is an atomic clock, but this one's an atomic clock that's not getting the signal, and this one is an atomic clock that is getting the signal, and is Verizon time and AT&T time. We're surrounded by the time. They weren't. So a town crier would go out and say, Rabbi Sai, time to get ready for Shabbos, and closes out the Ramah, and he says, V'hu b'mkaim hatkiyos b'yamehem, the announcement of this town crier that stood in the place of the shofar blasts that they used to blow back in the day, v'chein roi linog b'chol makom, and the Ramah says that indeed this should be the minig everywhere. Says the Mishnah Berurah. The Ramah said that this announcement should be made a half hour or an hour before Shabbos. Samach l'Shabbos kachatzi shah. Half hour before Shabbos, that's when you make the announcement. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what does this mean? A half an hour before Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu chatzi shah, koidem sheniskasa hashemesh me'itanu. This is a half an hour before the sun becomes covered. This is what we call shkia, sundown. The sun goes down below the horizon. Now the sun is covered from us. We can no longer see it. So the Ramah, according to the Mishnah Berurah, is saying the announcement should be made a half an hour before Shkia. This was the announcement that the Shliach Tzibur would make for everybody in the city that it's time to get ready for Shabbos. But then, says the Mishnah Berurah, there should be another announcement. Ulabali malachos, for the people that are doing malacha, people that are actually working, roi l'shloach ish, it would be proper to send out somebody, levatel oisan mi malachtan, to have people stop doing their work, mikoidim, even earlier than a half an hour before Shkia. How early? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Tahainu shtei shoysu mechza koidem tzeis hakechavim. The proper time to send out that announcement would be 2.5 hours before tzeis hakechavim. Shehu zman mincha ktana, which the Mishnah Berurah says is mincha ktana, v'chana, like we saw earlier, b'siman reish nun aleph. Now let's go mikal el hakaved over here. Let's cover the simpler things before the more complicated things. So the Mishnah Berurah is saying the first one announcement you have to make is an announcement for the general public, and that is a half an hour before Shkia. You make an announcement to tell everybody it's time to get ready for Shabbos. Then the Mishnah Berurah says, but then there's another announcement that should be made earlier. There's an announcement that should be made by Mincha Ketana that everybody should stop doing malacha. Close down your shops. Get out of the workplace. Go home. That's at Mincha Ketana. Now, what is that based on? That's based on a halacha that we saw in Siman Reish Nun Aleph. In Siman Reish Nun Aleph, the Mechaber said, Ha'oisem malacha be'erev Shabbos min ha'mincha ulamayla eina roya siman bracha. If you do malacha after the zman of mincha on erev Shabbos, eina roya siman bracha. What's the zman of mincha? So the Mechaber said, Yesh mefarshim mincha gedola. There are those that say that the Zman HaMincha means Mincha Gedola, which is very early in the day. That's a half an hour after Chatzos, the earliest time that you could say Mincha. Now, this time of year, for us, that would be approximately 1:30. So that's very early in the afternoon, no more Malacha. But Yesh Mefarshim Mincha Ketana. But there are those that say that this is later in the day. This is the Zman of Mincha Ketana. And the Mishnah Berurah said over there, "V'hasoymech al hamakilin loy hifsid." If you're makel and you don't do malacha after mincha ketana, that's okay. You could be soymech on the makilim. So fine. So one announcement a half an hour before Shkia, everyone should get ready for Shabbos. An earlier announcement by mincha ketana that it's time to stop doing malacha, like the halacha of Siman Reish Nun Aleph. Now, when is mincha ketana? So the Mishnah Berurah says over here that Mincha Ketana is 2.5 hours before Tzeis HaKechavim. This is the famous Machlokes to Magen Avram and the Gra. The Gra holds that Mincha Ketana is 2.5 hours before what we call Shkia, sundown. The Magen Avram holds that Mincha Ketana is 2.5 hours before Tzeis HaKechavim, which is later. Now, when is Tzeis HaKechavim? Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, you want to know when this Zman of Mincha Ketana is, which is 2.5 hours before Tzeis HaKechavim? Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'zeu le'erech sha'u revia kaidem sheniskasa hashemesh. This is approximately an hour and a quarter. Now, an hour and a quarter is 75 minutes. This is be'erech an hour and a quarter before Shkia. Okay, what's the cheshbon over here? Well, the cheshbon over here is like this. According to the Magen Avram, Tzeis HaKechavim is 2.5 hours before Tzeis HaKechavim. When's Tzeis HaKechavim? Well, Tzeis HaKechavim, according to the Magen Avram and the Rabbeinu Tam, Tzeis HaKechavim is 72 minutes. That's K'dei Hiluch Daled Milin, the time it takes to walk 4 mil. So this is 72 minutes after what we call Shkia is Tzeis HaKechavim. Okay. So now we've identified when Tzeis HaKechavim is. Tzeis HaKechavim, 72 minutes after Shkia, after what we call Shkia, after sundown. Okay, according to the Magen Avram, Mincha Ketana is 2.5 hours before that. Okay, so 2.5 hours before that. 72 minutes before Tzeis is Shkia. 72 minus 150 is 78. So 78 minutes before Shkia is Mincha Ketana, according to the Magen Avram. 78 minutes is 3 minutes longer than an hour and a quarter, and that's why the Mishnah Berurah says, you want to know when Mincha Ketana is? It's be'erech an hour and a quarter before Shkia, because it's 78 minutes before Shkia. So to sum it all up, says the Mishnah Berurah over here, 2 announcements, 1 announcement a half an hour before Shkia for the general public, stop everything, get ready for Shabbos. An earlier announcement, which was at Mincha Ketana, which we're saying is an hour and a quarter before Shkia. Okay, so this is 45 minutes before the other announcement, is the announcement, no more work, close the shops, get out of the office, go home. So those are the 2 announcements that you have over here. Continues the Mishnah Berurah and he says, Oid Kosav Magen Avram, the Magen Avram also writes, it would be proper for the shopkeepers sheyizkeru chanusan, that they should close the shops kemoi shah kaidem Shabbos, that about an hour before Shabbos the shops should close. Why, says the Chavetz Chaim? Ki gedoyla hamakshela, because having the shops open more than an hour before Shabbos becomes a tremendous michshol. It becomes a tremendous stumbling block. Why? Shalepamim ba sar echad. Sometimes you're in the store and you're keeping your store open very late to Shabbos. And okay, it's about time to close. And then suddenly the parnes of the town, or the poritz, or nowadays the mayor, poritz, mayor, the mayor walks in, and he wants to buy something, and he wants to look at the merchandise, and he wants to choose, and then he wants to haggle. And this transaction is going to stretch out and take time until it's Shabbos. So you're treading on thin ice. You're keeping your shop open very late on Erev Shabbos, and then something happens a minute before you decided to close. A transaction stretches out. Before you know it, your shop is open and you're doing business chas v'chalila on Shabbos. And besides this, says the Chavetz Chaim, Kefia Rogil, what typically happens is, Shahanoshim, the women, Kishabois Me'achanuyos, when they come home from doing the shopping, Roy Chatzos, that's when they go take a shower, V'loiv Shois Big Day Shabbos, and then they get dressed for Shabbos, Koydem Adlokas Haneris, before they go to Tzin Licht. V'em Yisacharu Milotzes, and if they're going to come out of the shops late, because the shops are open late, then Yavayu Chas V'Shalom L'Safek Chil Shabbos. Then they could mamish come to a Safek Chil Shabbos. If the stores are open till a half an hour before Shabbos starts, so they push off their shopping until late, then they come home and they take a shower and they get dressed, they put on the makeup and everything else, and before you know it, Chas Chalila, they come to do Malacha when it's already Shabbos. And again, remember, this is against the backdrop. We didn't have clocks all over the place. Maybe they had no clock at all. They didn't have a clock in the house. They're looking outside. They're looking at the sky to determine when Shabbos is. And this certainly could become a problem on the winter short Arvei Shabbos. Al-Kain, therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, Me'hanochain ma'oid, it would be very proper, she'akdimu lotzeis, that people should leave the shops and close them down early. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, "Va'oidos Kabbalah Shabbos gam kein yesh kilkel." Besides this kilkel that we're worried about the women and that they might chas v'chalila come to Chil Shabbos, there's another very basic problem when it comes to what time people are going to be Makabel Shabbos. Sheroy va'am yesh lahem heter b'toyos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, most people have an idea in their head which is wrong. In their heads, they have an idea that there's a heter. Yesh lahem heter b'toyos. Shekol oid shaloi amru baruchu oy kabbalah Shabbos kivi anog biyamenu. People think that until they say baruchu by Ma'ariv, or according to our minig, where we say Kabbalah Shabbos, either when they say Boy V'Shalom or when they say Mizmor Shel Yom Shabbos, Oisin Kol Tzarek Lehem L'Shabbos Alfi Pishu Laila Mamish. Chavetz Chaim says there are Amaratzim who have an idea in their head, a false idea, that when are you prohibited from doing Malacha on Shabbos? After you Makabel Shabbos. So even if it's dark, if I wasn't Makabel Shabbos yet, it's not Shabbos yet. When is Kabbalah Shabbos? So later on, we're going to see in Halacha that certainly Shabbos comes in automatically at a certain point in time. We'll have to identify that exact point later on, I think in Reish Samach Aleph. But even if you're being Makabel Shabbos early, so back in the day, the Mechaber is going to say that when you said Baruch Hu by Ma'ariv, that's Kabbalah Shabbos. Nowadays, we have Kabbalas Shabbos, right? L'chuna Ranana, L'chadoidi, Mizmor Shir. So used to be that Kabbalah Shabbos was when they said Mizmor Shir L'Yoyba Shabbos. Now we have L'chuna Ranana, L'chadoidi. It became by Boy V'Shalom. Boy V'Shalom is considered Kabbalah Shabbos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, a lot of people thought that you could mamish do malacha until you're Makabel Shabbos, either with Baruchu or with Boy V'Shalom or Mizmor Shir. Valkain, and therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, Yesh lahakdim l'Kabel Shabbos. We have to make sure that people take in Shabbos early. So therefore, we have to make sure to be Makabel Shabbos early. So this is the Chavetz Chaim is continuing to say, close down the shops and let's make sure people are Makabel Shabbos early, because otherwise you're going to have people who are going to say Boy V'Shalom 45 minutes after Shkia, and they're going to think that they can do Malacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, "Ve'ein lahamtin al adam gadol she'adayin lo ba." If you're in shul and you're waiting for the Rav, you're waiting for the Rosh Yeshiva, you're waiting for an Adam Chashiv to come before you Makabel Shabbos, don't do that. Be Makabel Shabbos before they come. Don't wait for them. Im higia zman she'Kabbalah Shabbos. If the proper time for Kabbalah Shabbos comes, be Makabel Shabbos. Ki zechus uloi, adarabba, it'll be a zechus for the Adam Gadol, shelo yischal Shabbos al yodoi, that people, if you're going to wait for him, people might come to be Makabel Shabbos. Don't wait for him. Be Makabel Shabbos without him. The Ramah said that it is royal linoy b'chol makom. It would be a proper meaning everywhere that we should have these town criers announcing the time for Shabbos and the time for people to stop doing malacha, etc., etc. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Cotton Beis B'Chamakim, Kidei Shelo Yavo Yisrael Lidei Chilul Shabbos. This is in order to prevent Eden from coming Chas v'Chalila to Chilul Shabbos. Ubekihilois Gedolos Ma'od. What do you do in very big cities? She'ef Shalahachriz, where in a small shtetl, so the shamish could go outside of the shul and blow the shofar. Or somebody could go into the street and make a big announcement that all the Yidden in town will hear it. But what do you do in the Kehilos Gedolos? She'iev Shalachris. Nochid Ma'oid. The Chavetz Chaim says it would be very proper. She'yimtzu anoshim hamisnadvim ba'am. You should find dedicated people who are dedicated to serving the tzibur. Leilech ulezares b'chol rechayvos kirya. To go out and be mezares and make announcements in all the streets. Al davaris sekiras achanuyos v'adlakas haneros. Making announcements to close the shops and that people should already tzid licht. And nowadays the Chavetz Chaim says this was found in many large cities, chaburos kedoshos, groups that he calls kedoshos, heilige people, ham yusados al hashkachas haShabbos, that are their towns are miyusad, they are founded and they have pillars al hashkachas haShabbos that are very concerned with Shabbos. Of ashrei chelkam, and fortunate is their portion. Kihem mezakim es Yisrael avim Shabbat Shamayim, because the people that are making these announcements, that are being mezaris people to make sure that they're mekabel Shabbos at the proper time, they are being mezaki Yisrael avim Shabbat Shamayim. V'yizku avor zeh mischaskim tamid b'mitzvah zu, and the Chavetz Chaim gives a bracha that those people that are mechazik in this mitzvah, they should be zoicha lebanim gedolei Yisrael, to have children who are gedolei Yisrael. I remember as a child a tremendous kiddushem shamayim. I remember driving through the Battery Tunnel. I guess now it's called the Hugh Carey Tunnel. I remember going through the Battery Tunnel and coming out on West Street and driving by the old World Trade Center. And across the street from the World Trade Center is now the World Financial Center. That whole area was built by the Reichmans. The Reichmans, famous philanthropic family of Toronto, tremendous Nedivim, people who gave tremendous amounts of tzedakah throughout their careers. They built the World Financial Center in that area across from the World Trade Center. Their famous construction company and development company, Olympia York, and when they were building over there was a massive construction site with hundreds and hundreds of workers, and on Erev Shabbos there would be sirens. They had contracts with all the contractors that they had to be shut down and off the construction site before Shabbos. I don't remember how long before Shabbos, but they had to all pack up, stop their work wherever they were holding, and they had to be gone. And they had sirens on the construction site, to announce time for everything to be shut down and everybody to leave. That was a tremendous Kiddush Shem Shamayim. And you have over here the bracha of the Chavetz Chaim, V'yizku avor zeh mischaschim tamid b'mitzvah zu lebanim gedolei Yisrael. Okay, let's turn to Siman Reish Nun Zayin, where we're going to just make a haschala, and we're going to start touching upon the halachic issues involved in hatmana. Now, hatmana means to insulate. So back in the day, on Erev Shabbos, they would cook up their food, and they would have their food nice and hot, and then they would insulate it. They would wrap it and cover it in wrappings and covers so that it should remain hot for the Friday night Suda. Indeed, many people do this nowadays too. They don't want to leave on a blech all Shabbos, so they boil up the soup, they cook the soup fully, and then they boil it up, they get it nice and hot before Shabbos, and then wrap it in towels, etc., and insulate it for going into Shabbos. There's many halachic issues and rules and regulations regulating what you can do and what you cannot do. That's the topic of this Siman. Siman Reish Nun Zayin, Dinei Hatmanas Chaben, the halachas concerning insulating hot food, ubayches seifim, and here we have 8 seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Ein toimnin b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to insulate a pot on Shabbos. You're not allowed to wrap the pot and insulate it on Shabbos. Afilu b'davar she'ein moisif hevel. Even if you're using wrappings and insulating materials that do not add heat to the food items that you're wrapping. We're going to see that there are different types of insulating materials. There are insulating materials that they themselves generate heat. And therefore, when you wrap a pot in them, you're adding heat to what you insulate. Then there are materials that are einoi moisif hevel. They don't add heat. They don't generate any of their own heat. All they do is insulate the food to retain the heat of the food itself. Now, obviously, it's much more chamor, it's much more stringent to do hatmana with something that is moisif hevel, something that generates heat and adds heat. It's more kal to do hatmana with a davar she'enoi moisif hevel. Says the Mechaber, ein taimnin be Shabbos, on Shabbos itself, you're not allowed to do atmana. You're not allowed to insulate a pot on Shabbos itself. Afilu bedavar she'ein moisif hevel. Even if you're using insulating materials that do not add heat, even if you're using materials that only make the food retain their own heat, you're not allowed to do this hatmana betchila on Shabbos. You're not allowed to wrap a pot on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton aleph. Ein taimnim. After you cooked up your pot of food, you want to wrap it and insulate it, using something that will keep in the heat. Kegoin, for example, bekarim, uksasais, pillows and cushions and blankets, or similar such materials. Va'asru lasais kain b'Shabbos, and the Chazal aser doing this on Shabbos. This is an Issa D'Rabbanan. The taima, and the reason for this Issa D'Rabbanan is the Shema Yimtza Oz Kidei Rasai Tzenenis. What's going to happen? Chazal were afraid. We're talking on Shabbos. So Shabbos already started. Now you go to your pot and you want to wrap it up. And you're thinking that you have a nice hot pot of chicken soup and you're going to wrap it up so it should be hot for the Suda. You go and you find out, it's not nearly as hot as I thought it was. I'll turn on the flame. Or I'll go ahead and I'll stoke the coals. That's what we're afraid of. The reason for this Issa D'Rabbanan is the Shema Yimtza Oz Kidei Rasai Tzenenes. Maybe when you go to do atman on the pot, you're going to find that the pot is cold. The Yarsicha. And now you're going to boil it up. The Chayiv Mishum Mevashel. And now you're going to go be over on an Issa Bishul Daraisa. Now many of you are thinking right away, Rabbi Weiss, Issa Bishul Daraisa? We've spent a lot of time already with Shehiyah and Chazara talking about Bishul. I don't understand. We have over here a pot of food that's Bavushal called Tzarchai. How do we have Bishul? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Even if we're dealing with the Shitas that we're going to learn about in Siman Shin Yud Ches, that there's no Bishul over here, because what do you mean? We're talking about a pot of chicken soup that was already boiled up. Even if it's cold. Now, remember, we also learned that by a davar lach, by liquid, if it's nitztan and legamri, and you make it hot again, there is bishul, but these are bakloikesin. So says the Mishnah Berurah, even according to the Shita, that says that there is no bishul over here, since it was already cooked, still there's room for a gzera. Nevertheless, there's still room here for a gzera. Why? Because if you're going to find that the pot is cold, you're going to go warm it up. How are you going to warm it up? You're going to warm it up on top of a fire. Ooh, now that you're warming it up on top of a fire, our old gezerah comes back. V'yechata b'gecholim, you're going to stoke the coals. V'yeskayev mishum mavir, and even if you're not over on bishul, you're going to be over on havara. So far, what do we have over here? We have the first very basic halacha of hatmana. And that is, hatmana lechatchila on Shabbos is osir. To go insulate and wrap a pot of hot food on Shabbos itself is osir. Even if you're using a davar she'eina moisef hevel, even if you're using insulating materials that don't generate and add heat to the food, it is still osir to do hatmana on Shabbos. Why? A gzera, because you're going to go to insulate this food. Why are you insulating it? Because you want it to be nice and hot. You're going to encounter the pot and see that it got cold. You might go reheat it. You might be over bishul. Even if you're not being over bishul, you might be mechata b'gecholim in order to reheat it. So the Chazal made this gezerah. Continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says, this is osir on Shabbos proper, once Shabbos began. Aval b'safik chashecha, But what if we're in that time of Bein Hashmoshes, where it's Suffolk Yom and Suffolk Laila, so it's not really for sure Shabbos yet? Now, during Bein Hashmoshes, which we'll have to identify exactly when Bein Hashmoshes is, but for our purposes, we'll go with what we paskin like nowadays, according to Rav Paiskim, which is that Bein Hashmoshes extends from the time of Shkia, when the sun goes down beneath the horizon, what we call Shkia, from Shkia to Tzeis HaKechavim. That's Bein Hashmoshes. That's the time, according to the Gra, Suffolk Yom, Suffolk Laila. So now, are you allowed to do Hatmana during that time? Let's remember, Hatmana is an Issa D'Rabbanan. So, says the Mechaber like this, Ava b'Suffolk Chashecha, during the time of Bein Hashmoshes, which is only Suffolk if it's Shabbos, Taimnin Boy. Then you could do Hatmana with what? With materials that are not Moisiv Hevel. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton base. Avo b'Suffolk Chashecha. I'll come on b'Siman Reish Samach Aleph Sif Aleph. Take a look later on in Siman Reish Samach Aleph Sif Aleph Behaga u'Mamash Kasav Dusham. We're going to write at length over there precisely when is this time of Suffolk Chashecha, this time of Bein Hashmoshes. But for our purposes, we're going to say right now from Shkia to Tzeis HaKechavim, Ois Katan Gimel. During that time, Taimnin Boy, then you could do Hatmana. Why? The Stam Kederais Ben Hashmoshes Rois Chaysein, says the Mishnah Berurah, the reason you could do Hatmana during the time of Ben Hashmoshes is because the truth is that this Gzera is if you're talking about Ben Hashmoshes is right after you started Shabbos. You started being Noyeg Kedusha Shabbos by Shkia, right? What? You didn't heat up your pot at all? Probably at the time of Ben Hashmoshes, the chances that you're going to go look at the chicken soup by Ben Hashmoshes and find out that it's cold, it's not likely for that to happen. You certainly heated up your food before Shabbos, so we're not so concerned that during Ben Hashmoshes you're going to encounter your pot and find out that it was cold, and now you might come to reheat it or to be mechata b'gecholim, and therefore we were not so makbid during Ben Hashmoshes. The stam keres Ben Hashmoshes, Reis saying stam pots during Ben Hashmoshes are still hot, v'lekel migzar gzera hanal, and therefore we're not so worried about this gezerah. Says the Mechaber weiter, ve'ein taimnin b'davar hamoisif hevel. Now, we spoke about so far doing Hatmana with a davar she'enoi moisiv hevel, with materials that do not generate and add heat to the food. Okay, how about if you want to use materials that do generate heat and do add heat to the food? That's very chamor. Says the Mechaber, ve'ein taimnin b'davar moisiv hevel, you're not allowed to insulate food in order to keep it hot on Shabbos. Afilu mi ba'od yoim, even on Erev Shabbos, before Shabbos, during the day, you're not allowed to go ahead and insulate your pot for Shabbos with materials that are moisiv hevel and leave the food inside those insulating wrappers going into Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Dalet, Bedavar Hainu l'tzorech Shabbos. This is if you're insulating it for Shabbos. How about if you're insulating food on Erev Shabbos, not for Shabbos use, from a love of Malka? It would seem from the Ramah that you can't do any Atmana whatsoever on Erev Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos. The Magen Avram is matmiya on this, and he concludes the Rak Chumrahu Shanagu Kain V'Loi Medina. According to the El Yerabba and the Levush, you're allowed to do Hatmana for Motzei Shabbos. There wouldn't even be a minig to be machmir. Ois Katan Hey, hamoisiv hevel. If you're talking about materials that add heat, you're not allowed to do Hatmana even in the middle of the day on Erev Shabbos and leave the food in those wrappers going into Shabbos. Why? The problem of doing Hatmana with a davar shemoisif hevel, with materials that add heat, are, how about if somebody wants to insulate a pot with burning embers, with ash How are you going to insulate a pot with ash? Well, let's say you put a pot inside a box and you line the box with ash, hot ash. Now, sometimes when you have hot ash, you have burning embers in them. Now, if you're going to use insulation that has burning embers in it, when you go to manipulate the pot, you manipulate the coals, you might come to stoke them on Shabbos and be over on Havara. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cut and Vav, the Mechaber said you can't do this. Afilu mi ba'od yoim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasav Pri Begadim, Ta'afilu mi hitmin koide b'chatzos b'boker. 11 o'clock in the morning, Friday morning. You cooked up your chicken soup. It's nice and hot. I want to be finished with my Shabbos prep early. I'm going to do the hatmana on the chicken soup now at 11 o'clock in the morning. And you want to go and you want to insulate it with a davar shemoisif hevel. Says the Pri Megadim, when the Mechaber says over here that you're not allowed to do it even miba'od yom, he means even early in the day, even before chatzos. You're not allowed to go ahead and be matmin a pot with a davar shemoisif hevel. Mikamakam avidi surah. Now, you want to do the hatmana with a davar shemoisif hevel at 11 o'clock in the morning Erev Shabbos and then take the pot out before Shabbos? That you could do. When we're saying you can't be matmin the pot with a davar shemoisif hevel at 11 o'clock in the morning Friday morning, it means to do it and then leave it like that going into Shabbos. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The source of Liman HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's for his panazit shtuchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the BS Goyal Tzedek. Again, I'm recording this on Erev Tisha B'Av. I can't believe that we have to go take out the Kinnison and the Eichas again. Another year. Remember one time that the Yeshivas Atzal or Rosh Chodesh Nisan, people were wishing the Yeshivas Atzal a good Chodesh, a good Chodesh, a good Chodesh, a good Chodesh, and the Yeshivas Atzal gave a krechts. It was Benisan Nigalu, Benisan Asid Lihigalois, Nach Hanisan, and the Gulas Nach Nishdab. So it's another Tisha B'Av, unfortunately, and not only is it another Tisha B'Av, but it's an Eis Tzara L'Yaakov. It's hard to believe that we're still in this matzav. The Rosh Hashanah should see to it that it should finally end. We should be zeicher to the Bias Goyal Tzedek B'meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.